Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, the St. Louis Blues are back after losing a franchise record 8 games in a row in regulation. The St. Louis Blues are now on a 5-game win streak that has brought them back to 500. They are 8-8 overall. Plus, they are only 1 point out of a playoff spot. I'm going to be talking about everything that's gone right over the last 5 games, what the Blues can build on throughout this win streak, and which version of this team is the real thing. All of those questions and more answered today on the Locked On Blues podcast.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, as always, Josh Hyman. If this is your first time tuning into the show, welcome. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for tuning in. If you're a returning listener, thanks for making Locked On Blues your first listen. Either way, this podcast is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. Check me out on YouTube. Growing there pretty rapidly. A lot of fun stuff there. You can leave comments. I try to interact with a lot of the comments and stuff. But yeah, before we get into today's episode, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's just jump into it. At this time last week-ish, the sky was falling for the St. Louis Blues. They had lost 8 games in a row in regulation. They were heading into a Thursday night matchup against the San Jose Sharks, followed by games against the league-leading Vegas Golden Knights and the defending Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche, before continuing their tough schedule with games against teams like Washington and Chicago, who aren't top of the standings by any means, but certainly aren't pushovers. I said heading into that San Jose game, or after that San Jose game, I should say, when the Blues finally snapped that losing streak and they got their first win, I said that I would be happy and honestly not surprised with a split in the games against Vegas and Colorado. You know, heading into that weekend, both games on the road. Sure, they did just beat San Jose, but it wasn't exactly like, a dominant victory. They kind of, it was 5-3. Felt like they did some good things, but still felt like they had a lot to work on going into a game against, a dominant Vegas team on the road. It was certainly intimidating. And then following that up with a Colorado team on the road who had, obviously just won a Stanley Cup. The Blues had their work cut out for them. And we have really seen a completely different team 5 games. Obviously, they beat San Jose 5-3 in pretty convincing fashion. The offense is getting it going. They're scoring a lot more goals. They're missing the net a lot less. They're turning the puck over a lot less. The special teams is figuring it out. And then they go into Vegas against the Golden Knights and fall 2-1, but eventually take a 3-2 lead. With Ryan O'Reilly getting the game-winning goal, and they end up winning that game 3-2 in a very convincing fashion, in almost like a playoff atmosphere type game. 3-2, gritty, battling back and forth, killing off penalties and such. That was a really, really strong win. And then they head into Colorado, and they give up the first goal and use that to bounce back and score 3 straight and go up 3-1. Really early in the third period, Jordan Kyrou gets a goal to put the Blues up 3-1. He's had a spectacular turnaround ever since his struggles. And Lehkonen eventually made it a 1-goal game a little bit later, but the Blues did a spectacular job of slamming the door. There were a ton of shots in that game, 47 for Colorado, 39 for St. Louis. That is one thing that I'll get into a little bit later, but the Blues are still giving up a lot of shots on goal, and that plagues them last night against the Washington Capitals, but I'll get into that. So they beat Vegas, they beat Colorado, and then they go into a rivalry game against the Chicago Blackhawks. And I predicted that the Blues offense would finally figure it out and score a lot of goals, and that they did. Goals all around, goals from Rosen, Kyrou, O'Reilly, Pitlick even and Ivan Barbashev. So the mom strip for the Blues has gone very well in that sense. 5 different goal scorers in a 5-2 victory. The offense is scoring at I think like a 4.5 goals per game clip over the last 5 wins. They were scoring a goal and a half per game in their 8-game losing streak. So a goal and a half per game over a span of 8 games is then immediately followed by 4.5 goals per game in 5 games. Or actually, maybe it wouldn't be 4.5 because the Blues did get a shootout goal. So it would be a little bit less than 4.5. I think it would be like 4.25, let's call it. But still, it just goes to show everything that I was sort of saying is that this team just isn't that bad. They're not as incompetent offensively as they were showing during that losing streak. And sure enough, the law of averages evened out and the Blues started scoring a ton of goals. It's the real question now comes down to what happens when we find the healthy middle, because we've seen the absolute worst of the Blues during that 8-game losing streak. And I don't want to say we've seen the absolute best of the Blues, because I think last night was still a pretty rough game from them that they got fortunate and came out with a win. But in terms of like their offense and firing on all cylinders, we've seen close to the best of the Blues, at least in terms of what we've seen this season. So the question is, what's going to be that middle ground? How are the Blues going to sort of balance out over these next 70 odd games for the rest of the season? Just because they're not going to keep scoring 4+ goals a game every single game, but they're also not going to go dead quiet like they did in that 8-game losing streak. So throughout the rest of this episode, I'm going to talk about what I think went right for the Blues over these 5 games and what I think that they can still work on in order to carry this momentum for the rest of the regular season. But before I get into that, I want to tell you guys that today's episode is brought to you by betonline.net. BetOnline.net is, of course, your number one source for your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there: football, basketball, soccer, hockey, even esports. They've got it all over at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, just like this one, which I hope you love this one if you're here. Maybe you hate listening to it, which, you know what, a listen's a listen. But you can find podcasts just like this one over at betonline.net. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right, so what's gone right? How have the Blues been winning games? Let's start talking about some individual players, shall we? Jordan Binnington has continued to look spectacular. He's given up a couple goals here and there. Sure, he hasn't exactly, pitched a bunch of shutouts, but his save percentage over his last few wins, I think, is like close to 950. He's keeping the Blues in games. The Blues are getting outshot a ton. Like last night against Washington, they were outshot 51-24. It was bad. I think, after the Blues got their first 3 goals, the shots were incredibly one-sided. And that's not even a matter of Jordan Binnington. That's Thomas Christ playing well. But the goaltending has been really, really good for the Blues this year. And that's something that maintained itself throughout the losing streak, which is why I was very optimistic that even though the Blues were losing games, it wasn't at the fault of their goaltenders. The goaltenders were giving them a chance to win in almost every single one of those games. So I kind of had the inclination that as soon as the Blues figured it out, they'd have a lot of success, just because goaltending is the backbone of every successful hockey team. When you have good goaltending and, your goalie is giving you a chance to win, that makes things so much easier. But overall, I just think it's a matter of the Blues simplified their game. And that's something that I was saying a lot, as in terms of like what do they need to do. When I talked to Jack from Locked On Blackhawks, what have the Blues been doing? What do they need to do to continue success? And keeping it simple. I feel like they were pressing a little bit too much, especially guys like Kyrou and O'Reilly, who had gotten off the slow starts, where we're just doing a little bit too much, making that one extra pass when they didn't need to, trying to pick the top corner when in reality all that they had to do is maybe just fire a puck low on net, just little things. And it feels like they did a good job of simplifying their game over the last 5 games. And it led to instant offense. They had 5 different goal scorers in that game against Chicago. Jordan Kyrou, after his slow start, is now the leading goal scorer on the team. Ryan O'Reilly has been spectacular. He's got like 8 points over his last 6 games or something like that, 5 games, something like that. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they've been really, really good at sticking with what works. And I think it would be really easy for a team like the Blues to, I don't know, get too much in their own heads after losing so many games like that. You know, you win one and you start thinking, "Oh my god, we got to win the next one." But they really don't feel like a team that had an 8-game losing streak just, a week and a half ago. Um but I don't know, overall, I think we've seen the Blues we've seen over these last 5 games have been much more of an indication of the Blues we're gonna see for the rest of the season rather than the Blues in the 8-game losing streak. You know, you look at the goal totals, um, they're very, very spread out, and that's something that I like. You got Kyrou with 6, O'Reilly with 5, Shannon with 4, Tarasenko with 4, Thomas with 3, Falk with 3, Barbashev with 3, Krug with 3, Saad with 3, Buchnevich with 2. Um, Buchnevich with 2 obviously is incredibly surprising. He'll increase that goal total. He got the first goal of the season for the St. Louis Blues, and then he didn't score again until last night against Washington. So I expect the floodgates to sort of open for him. But Cairo being up there at 6 goals is great. It feels like he could have at least 10. You know, if he was able to have a little bit more success throughout that losing streak. But he looks like a superstar out there. He was everywhere last night. He had a couple assists as well. Um, He's up there for the lead in points. He's got 9 points, the leader being Braden Shen with 13. So overall, I think the Blues are getting offense by commission. You know, they're not really relying on their top guys to get them all their goals. And that's led to a lot of success. You know, you got guys like even like Tyler Pitlick chipping in for a goal. Ivan Barbashev seems like he's picked up pretty much right where he left off in terms of his goal scoring. Justin Falk is having close to a career year um, with 12 points and playing great defense. Colton Parayko, before his injury, was looking really, really good. He looked spectacular in that game against Colorado, you know, finishing his checks and just playing physical. His injury is definitely concerning. I guess I could take a moment to talk about that. So Craig Ruby has said that it's not related to the back injury that sort of was ailing Colton Parayko for a long time. It's tough with hockey, you know, these injuries being undisclosed. You never really know what to expect, and I'm definitely a little worried the fact that they're being so vague with it. And there isn't really a timetable for return. Like I don't really know if he's considered day to day or what the deal is, but definitely something we should keep an eye on. And you know, as we find out more information, it's important to you know see where that goes. But overall, you know, I think the defense has been pretty solid. The offense has been really solid in the last 5 games. Obviously, they're scoring a ton of goals, sort of like what we expected. And a pleasant surprise, the goaltending's been really good. Thomas Greiss definitely struggled for a little bit there last night against Washington when they really turned on the Jets late in the third period. But the Blues were gassed. You know, they're on the second end of a back-to-back, traveling, blah, 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 blah. That's probably a game that they should have lost. And you could look at that in a negative light and be like, oh, you know, they deserve to lose that game. The 8-game losing streak Blues are back. But my argument is the 8-game losing streak Blues would have lost that game 6-0. They wouldn't have scored 3 goals in that game, 4 goals in that game, whatever. So I always say the mark of a good hockey team is winning games that you should lose. However that comes about, whether that's a 1-0 win in an absolute goaltender's duel or a 5-4 shootout win in a game where you get outshot, outplayed, outpressured, you know, 75% of the time. You blow a 3-goal lead, and yet you still come away with a victory. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, you know, you're not going to be looking back at that game and being like, man, you know, if only the Blues got the extra regulation win or whatever. At the end of the day, you're like, you look back on that win and you say, yeah, that's a pretty impressive win. You know, a good team like Washington, even though they're having struggles this year, a good team like Washington in their home arena, you know, all the momentum in the world, maybe got a little bit lucky that last goal got called off for the high stick. But at the end of the day, you know, Washington had every right to win that game. Held them off in overtime, held them off in a shootout, and came away with a victory. It's an incredibly impressive win, one of the most impressive of the year, in the sense, and in terms of winning games that they deserve to lose. So that's the Blues have turned over a new leaf. Like I said, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, they would have gotten destroyed against Washington given those circumstances. Backup goalie in second leg of a back-to-back, 51 shots to 24. Like that game would have been 7-1, a little bit ago with the way that the Blues were playing. So the fact that not only did the Blues hold their own in that game, they eventually came out with a victory is very, very encouraging. Plus, they have a couple easy games coming up. I think they have 2 games in a row against Anaheim at home, who is 5-12 on the year. So all the reason to continue the win streak for the Blues. And in this upcoming third and final segment, I'm going to be giving my tips or my thoughts on how the Blues can continue this win streak and what they can do to build off of this momentum of these last 5 games. So make sure you stay tuned. All right. So the Blues have won 5 in a row. Things are looking good-ish. They're 1 game out of a playoff spot, right behind the Nashville Predators and the Edmonton Oilers. They are only 3 points out of a playoff spot in the Central. That first one obviously being the wild card. You know what? All things considered, yeah, the Blues are 8-8, but oh my God, the Blues are 8-8. They were 3-8, 3-8. They had lost 8 in a row, and they were probably about a week away from the season being a lost cause. Like, Blues were 3-8 heading into this 5 game win streak. If they lose 4 of those games, 3 of those games, then all of a sudden you're 6-11, 4-12, God forbid 3-13. 8-8 obviously is the best case scenario. And if you had told me heading into these next 5 games that we're going to get the best case scenario, I would have even said like the best case scenario was winning like 4 of them, considering you had Vegas and Colorado and back to back. It really feels like a huge, huge, huge accomplishment that the Blues are sitting here at 500 after the way that they started in their first 11 games. And I'm encouraged. This team has shown throughout these last week or so that they have a lot of mental fortitude. It's really easy just doing anything in life to lose motivation, not just sports, just anything you do. If you struggle as immensely as the Blues did, it is really, really hard to get back in a place where you're having success. That's just human nature. Whether it's sports, work, relationship, whatever. If you metaphorically or literally lose 8 games in a row, you perform that badly at your job 8 games in a row, 2 weeks in a row, historical fashion. It is incredibly hard to get back to a place where you have success and you have confidence. And the Blues just snapped their fingers and said, "Yeah, no, we're not going to get put down this easily. We're not as bad as people think we are. We're going to prove everyone that we're a legit team by going on and winning 5 in a row." And that is a sign of, like I said, a good team, a strong team. You could make all the arguments at the end of the day of, well, a good team wouldn't have lost 8 in a row in the first place, or a good team wouldn't have given up 50 shots to Washington and blown a 3-goal lead. And you might be right. But at the end of the day, I talk about how that 8-game losing streak is going to be something that the Blues can look back on and say, remember when we were at our lowest, blah, blah, blah. Now having this 5-game winning streak in a couple months from now, when the Blues are facing any sort of difficulties in their schedule or just any sort of adversity. Not only will they be able to look back at the 8-game losing streak and be like, okay, at least it's not that bad. They can say, okay, hey, here's what happened after the 8-game losing streak. Not only is whatever adversity we're dealing with right now not as disastrous as the 8-game losing streak. When it was that disastrous, we came out and we won 5 in a row, including 2 games including against 2 of the best teams in our conference and in the NHL as a whole. It's encouraging. It is very, very encouraging that this early in the season, the Blues have faced this much adversity and they have come out on top. Like I said, I very, very easily could have been sitting here talking about, what are the Blues going to do in the draft? Should they trade people away at the trade deadline? Whatever. Now all of a sudden it's looking like, give it another few games and the Blues are going to be right in the playoff hunt again. I mean, they are right in the playoff hunt again, but give it another few games and they could be in a playoff spot. I don't think any of us predicted it to come this early. Fortunately, the rest of the Central Division in the West as a whole is pretty weak so far this year, and that's definitely helped the Blues out as well. But that doesn't, mitigate the success that they've had. They have been very, very good at silencing the haters, keeping crowd noise out and just playing their game. Every single one of them, Jordan Cairo, especially a guy that was so scrutinized early in the season, immediately called an overpay. Like 8 games into the season or 11 games into the season, his contract was called an overpay or whatever. And Doug Armstrong had this great quote. I'm not going to judge these next 8 years after the first 10 or so games, but everybody, analysts, media, social media, professionals were all saying, "Oh, Jordan Cairo, he's off to this rough start." And a young guy like him on a big prove it deal, that certainly got to him. You could see that as his struggles continued, he was gripping the stick a little bit tighter, trying a little bit too hard. But then all of a sudden, he comes out and looks like an absolute superstar again. He's making passes, he's scoring goals, he's setting up his teammates, he's playing defense. Let's talk about Jordan Cairo's defense. He has been the best defender he's ever been, maybe in these last few games. He's getting his stick in passing lanes. He's hustling. He's breaking up plays. It really feels like he's unlocked another element to his game. And the fact that immense struggles not only caused him to stand up to the challenge and get back to where he was, I think he's honestly a better player. Like, this is the best Jordan Cairo we have ever seen, and it's immediately following one of the worst slumps of his recent career. So that's just reflects the mentality of the team as a whole. Not only are they getting back to where they were, they're moving a step past that. They're playing even better than maybe what they were in those first 3 games. Ryan O'Reilly's having one of the best offensive stretches of his career. That goal that he scored against Washington, that backhander was insane. So pretty, so aesthetically pleasing, just a beautiful goal. Jordan Binnington's playing some of the best hockey of his career in terms of the regular season. Thomas Greiss has been great. Colton Parayko before his injury has been great. Justin Falk has been great. Braden Shen has been spectacular. Vladimir Tarasenko's having a great season. Like, up and down the lineup, you look at these players and you think, wow, like they are all outperforming expectations based on that 8-game losing streak. So I think that the 5 games is much more of a reflection of the Blues team that we're going to see this season than the 8 games that they lost, because of all of those reasons I just listed. I hope I'm right. That being said, that is all the time I have for you today. I want to thank each and every one of you so much for listening. It's been an up and down week, not just with the Blues, but with my internet connection. So finally able to get an episode out. Appreciate all you guys for bearing with me, being patient there. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button, like I said, on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. It's completely free. You can follow Locked On Blues on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Blues. You can follow the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. Hit subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.